Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Noam Unger, and I'm the Director of the Sustainable Development and Resilience Initiative here at CSIS and a Senior Fellow with the Project on Prosperity and Development. This session, sponsored by Prosper Africa, will explore what the next chapter of two-way trade and investment in Africa might be ideally, and how we can make that happen. Africa is undergoing a seismic transformation. Everything from its rapidly growing youth population, with a total projected to grow to 2.5 billion or almost 2.5 billion by 2050, or its high-speed digital innovation with over 500 million internet users and growing, and an abundance of natural resources accounting for 30% of the world's mineral reserves, including critical minerals and rare earth elements. These have all teed up investments and business in Africa as some of the largest trade and investment opportunities of the 21st century. Whoops. Of the 21st century. That's a very important point. Hopefully you could hear what I was saying before, but well, then it's good that the mic is on now. At the same time, China has already invested heavily, becoming Africa's largest two-way trading partner, dwarfing U.S. Africa trade by a factor of 4, and providing twice the level of U.S. foreign direct investment. Chinese companies have also been diversifying, investing deeply in varied industries such as infrastructure, manufacturing, telecommunications, and agriculture. The U.S. has a number of tools of economic statecraft at its disposal, but these tools can be limited or they're not operating to their full potential. One of them that is up for renewal and on a lot of people's minds these days is the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA. It's a unilateral trade preference program first enacted in 2000 that offers duty-free access to U.S. markets for eligible countries in sub-Saharan Africa that meet certain criteria, certain conditions. Allowing AGOA to lapse entirely would be a very unfortunate political outcome, in my view. So the real question from my standpoint now is whether to renew it as is or revamp it and modernize it to align with a changed and changing world. This panel is going to explore the potential key elements of the next chapter of U.S. trade and investment in Africa, including the AGOA program, but also looking more broadly than that. That's the conversation we want to have with each other and with all of you. We're fortunate to host 3 speakers with us today to discuss these issues. Each brings a unique perspective. Danielle Jean-Pierre serves as the Director for Trade for Prosper Africa, the U.S. government's initiative aimed at strengthening the strategic and economic partnership between the U.S. and countries throughout all of Africa by creating new jobs, diversifying global supply chains, and investing in the continent's infrastructure and digital transformation. Currently based in South Africa, Danielle has also held various legal advisor roles for USAID over the years, operating out of Haiti, Senegal, and here in Washington. Welcome. And then Kristen Jency is a senior government affairs manager at Cisco and has deep expertise in international trade and digital policy issues. Prior to joining Cisco, she worked in various roles over 30 years at the Department of Commerce's International Trade Administration, including as director of the Office of Digital Services. Welcome, Kristen. And Mildred Nada-Pita serves as Bayer's head of public affairs for science and sustainability in Africa. And she has previously held roles for Bayer in connection to crop science and global healthcare, so many of the different parts of Bayer, such a huge factor worldwide. I will turn to each of them in the order that I just briefly introduced them, so that they can provide some opening comments reflecting on trends, opportunities, and challenges for deeper two-way U.S.-Africa engagement in trade and investment. Then we'll dig into further questions and a conversation here among the panel participants. And finally, we'll open the floor to questions from all of you in the audience. So please think of the questions as we go. To our speakers, our in-person guests, our online viewers alike, thank you once again for joining. And with that, allow me to first turn to Danielle. Welcome to CSIS, the Global Development Forum, Danielle, and thank you to Prosper Africa for sponsoring.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. So today, I'd like to discuss how Prosper Africa supports and advances trade and investment with the continent, as well as increased AGOA utilization. As Noam has mentioned, and as you're aware, our mission is to catalyze transformative two-way trade and investment flows demonstrating the U.S. government's commitment to mutual economic prosperity. But we do this in a different way. We are a private sector-led model of partnership that we feel benefits both U.S. businesses and African businesses. And so a priority for Prosper Africa is to encourage and engage more institutional investors, endowments, foundations, family offices, sovereign wealth funds, to look towards the African continent for new and exciting opportunities, including those made possible by AGOA. So why is this important? Well, if you look at the US market alone, there is $58 trillion of private wealth assets under management. So if we, through our work, could mobilize even 1% of that to start investing on the continent, that would be $580 billion of investment on the continent. So this is how we're thinking at Prosper to advance this two-way trade and investment relationship. And then when we think about trade, it's not just about transactions. We think about trade as a driver of transformation. Trade can actually reshape an economy, it can uplift communities, and it can really change lives. And so we don't always want to focus on these high-level investment numbers, but we want to also focus on the number of jobs that have been created through our work, the number of businesses that can now expand and have access to capital because of our work. So, it's a heart and mind approach to doing business differently on the continent. And so our commitment to leveraging this potential is clear. Prosper Africa over the past year, along with our US government partners, have facilitated approximately $14.2 billion in new two-way trade and investments over the past year. On the trade side, our trade strategy has two pillars. So the first pillar is providing grants to support and enhance more processing occurring on the continent. And then the second pillar is offering trade facilitation services and really connecting US buyers to African suppliers. On the supply side, we help African suppliers find qualified US buyers for duty-free goods through targeted investment facilitation and aggregation. As you well know, we're dealing often with SMEs, smallholder farmers, small businesses, and so a strategy of aggregation really helps to level the playing field and give these smaller businesses an opportunity to engage in the US market. On the demand side, we expand the network of US buyers sourcing competitive products from the African continent, which is increasingly vital as the global community is seeking to diversify its supply chain to support enhanced supply chain resilience. Our efforts are supported not only by USAID, which is a Prosper Africa partner, but Exim Bank, DFC, the US Trade and Development Association, the Department of Commerce, the Department of State, and many other US government agencies. So I'll give you an example of how we've collaborated. In February, USAID and Prosper Africa partnered to support bringing 68 African apparel firms to the Magic Apparel Show in Las Vegas. And this is a big sourcing destination where US buyers congregate to identify sourcing opportunities. So they were able to showcase their creativity, their capabilities, and this effort resulted in 297 individual business transactions that would result in 100 million in exports coming from the continent to the United States. And when you think about that, that could actually increase exports in the apparel sector from Africa to the United States by 10%. So even one entity in one event like that can really have an impact on our two-way trade and investment numbers. Looking ahead, we're using that same model this summer in New York at the Summer Fancy Food Show. We'll be bringing 150 African specialty food and agricultural companies, and we expect similar results with 100 million in expected transactions coming out of that. And so these individual events, that is a good start in terms of engaging the private sector. But in terms of seeking an exponential trade impact, we've recently launched a public-private partnership called the Africa Trade Desk. And so what this does, it is a platform that serves as an aggregator. It has connections to more than 20,000 US retail outlets across the United States, including major chains like Costco, Walmart, and Kroger. And their focus is on private labeling. And so they are able to have these conversations with large buyers and then source from the continent, again, through this aggregation approach, and then through that support these smallholder farmers and smaller SMEs with financing, with logistics, with slotting fees, with insurance, with all of these technical aspects that go into international trade, and of course, leveraging AGOA for duty-free importing into the United States. We see the Africa Trade Desk as more than just a trade facilitation platform. We see it as a call to action, because what we want is for the private sector to see this and to be challenged to come up with an innovative, technologically advanced way to collaborate with us to support and elevate US trade in a dynamic, sustainable, but more importantly, an empowering way. And so scaling two-way trade is essential for achieving our mutual goals, diversifying global supply chains, boosting Africa's processing capacity, and advancing shared objectives like job creation and economic growth. You've mentioned some interesting statistics about Africa in terms of the youth bulge and where they are in their economic development trajectory. And so, like, as you've mentioned, we concur with that and believe that Africa is on the brink of exponential growth, and increasing trade under AGOA is a key component to fulfilling that and having that progress. So thank you for your attention, and I look forward to engaging with you as we advance this transformative agenda.
Great. Thank you so much, Danielle. Kristen, let me turn to you. Same, opening thoughts on this broad topic.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for your comments. They speak to my heart, all the things you say about trade, my former background at the International Trade Administration. But being here at Cisco, I can tell you, what I've seen so far in my short tenure at the company is that a real commitment to Africa, a real commitment to having real discussions with counterparts all over the world to find out, what is it that you want and how can we meet those objectives? And I have had the privilege of participating in several rounds of meetings between Cisco executives and officials from all across the continent. And it really is an exchange of ideas. And we know that the measurement of success isn't just, how much infrastructure you put in, how many pieces of equipment you sell. It's are we delivering the outcome? If the government wants a more telehealth or telemedicine, how can we take all the steps to actually get there? So I'm just going to say a little bit. I know I used to be in government. I used to hate it when companies came up here and gave their commercial, but I do want to just say a few things about what Cisco is and what it does, because I do think it's relevant to the conversation. So Cisco is a really big tech company. We do all kinds of things. I think we're known for internet infrastructure, but we are involved in very high capabilities on cybersecurity and artificial intelligence and cloud and threat management, all these really important things. But it's a company that is operating in 80 countries, has 83,000 employees all over the world, and 363 global offices. But one of the reasons I came to Cisco, when I was looking, as a government person looking across the field of companies, because they really do believe in an inclusive future for all, and everything I've seen so far, supports that tagline, if you will. But they're really, everything that we do, we say securely connect everything to make anything possible. And the other tagline is our purpose is to power an inclusive future for all. So I wanted to shift a little bit and just talk about our Africa strategy with some numbers. I have a pretty little chart here, which I know you guys can't see, but Our strategy is really to embed purpose into our work, to deliver secure access, to increase collaboration for effectiveness, and to be a great place to work on the continent, and again, to power this inclusive future for all that I mentioned. And one thing that I think it really stands out to me is, we have executive sponsors for different regions in the company. And our executive sponsor is Fran Katsoudas. She is the executive vice president for, it's called 3P. It's purpose, people, and policy. And she really leads with that. And I feel really lucky to have her as the sponsor for Africa because she's a real tour de force. She loves to spend time on the continent. She loves to get things done. And she brings together both the technology side and the purpose side. And speaking of which, she is going to Kenya, South Africa, and Nigeria in the coming weeks. And I know she'll be there with Secretary of Commerce Raimondo in Kenya, April 23rd to 25th. She is also on the President's Advisory Council on Doing Business in Africa, which is a great role and a great way to be involved in the conversation. So in terms of just some numbers on what Cisco is doing, we have 1,230 networking academies in Africa, and this is the primary mechanism we use to try to train and upskill. And I can't tell you, every meeting I go to, no matter what region of the world, everybody's interested in training and skills. And not only for the traditional things like, cybersecurity, but also artificial intelligence, right? You can't walk into a room in Washington and not talk about AI. But what a lot of folks are concerned about is what are the skills that we need for AI? What does that look like? I know a lot of folks have concerns about, is AI going to be responsible for, is it going to take my job away? And it's important to have those conversations. But the Network Academy is a really great tool for training. And we have, like I said, we have 1,230 academies in Africa. And we've trained over 533,000 students since FY23. Over 2 million students since the inception of networking academies have been trained in Africa. We have more than 1,600 active partners in Africa. And in terms of business operations, we have 417 employees, 9 offices, and 13,000 partner sellers and 8 incubation hubs. I did want to mention also the Cisco Edge program, and this is the Country Digital Accelerator Experience Design and Go-to-Market team. But it really is about trying to incubate new job opportunities through these partnerships, to innovate, to create new platforms and build on today's software, and to educate, to transform the lives of learners, educators, and communities in Africa through the power of technology and education and career opportunities, which is just something I can't tell you how much it comes up in every conversation we have. But just that Cisco, is dedicated to also, not only providing hopefully the technology solutions that get the job done for the country that we're involved with, but also to the skills and training and to the people, to actually deliver what they're trying to get at the end of the day. So that's a little bit in terms of opening, but I can't wait to get into some of the questions because digital trade is very close to my heart, and we have a lot of exciting things to talk about in terms of digital trade on the continent. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kristen. Mildred, over to you.
Yes. Thank you and good afternoon. Yeah. Oh, good morning. It's still morning. It's really a pleasure for me to be here. My name is Mildred Nada-Peter. I head BIA's Public Affairs, Science and Sustainability for the continent, and I work and live out of Nairobi, Kenya. So it's really an honor for me to be here. BIA, as you know, is a global leader in agriculture and pharmaceuticals. I think we are one of the rare companies today that operate at that nexus of well-being when you look at health and agriculture and whole. So when we talk food and food security and nutrition, which has been identified even where at the, it's the World Bank meeting, that the World Bank has identified the problem of food security as one of the biggest issues, I think, coupled with climate change that will change the way Africa looks or trades or does business or evolves in the next coming year. So we do have this great opportunity as a company really to be at that nexus and to bring change on the continent. A couple of years ago, when Bayer was in a situation of transformation, we kind of looked at what our mission statement was, and we came out with a mission statement that said health for all and hunger for none. And the focus, of course, for us was, it sounded bogus at that time, because we were asking ourselves, are we really going to do what it takes to impact the health of millions and millions of people, or ensure that we do play our role as a leader in agriculture to also close the gap, whether we're talking about calorific deficiencies in countries where food security is still an issue. I think the final answer was that yes, we did have a role to play, and we clearly defined how that was going to span out. First of all, we recognized that in low and middle income countries that there was a need for action, and as a global leader that we could do something within that space. So we came up with a target to reach 100 million smallholder farmers across the globe, mainly in small and low and middle income countries. 100 million women would be reached through modern day contraceptive interventions, and of course providing health access to about 100 million women and children, especially across the globe. These targets have been incorporated into our business missions, and so the last 4 years has also seen us increase our investment into Africa. So I'll speak mainly for Africa, of which the target to reach farmers that we have in Africa is about 23 million people. Now, to give perspective also, 80% of Africa's food is grown by smallholder farmers. These are courageous men and women who work on, in most cases, less than 2 acres of land that they own, that they grow food for their families, and hopefully they grow food that they're able to convert into value in the market. Working with smallholder farmers is not the easiest of things, but is a challenge that we've looked at, and we agreed that we can actually, working together with other partners, whether government or multi-stakeholders, to see how we can drive and increase agricultural productivity on the continent. It has been quite a learning for us. One of the things that we have learned and seen is that the 1.3 billion people we currently have on the continent is actually a huge opportunity. That if we see it more as a marketplace where we can bring in some level of investment that would increase trade, whether it's intra-African, so within the continent, or even the opportunity that AGOA, for example, provides for the continent is really huge. We also looked at the portfolio that we're bringing on the continent. The African Union identified certain crops to be the key drivers that would actually help mitigate, whether we're looking at climate change, the effects on agriculture, productivity, the pest and disease pressures that we see on the continent, but also looking at food security in general. So you see rice, wheat, corn, soybeans. These are some of the crops that have been identified to play a major role in terms of food security and food nutrition on the continent. And we as a company are bringing the right innovation, the right varieties, the right capabilities. And those capabilities will not be possible without digital platforms. How do you reach millions and millions of smallholder farmers in villages, in hamlets, thousands of kilometers sometimes far from the infrastructure that may be able to help them? So in doing that, we've also sat with organizations around the continent to see how do we bridge that gap? How do we ensure that there is also an adoption of some of these technologies where farmers can actually reach out, not only to get knowledge on the different varieties or new ways of growing food, so good agronomic practices, not only to get knowledge on specifically on our portfolio, but even how do we link them to markets? So it's an end-to-end kind of value chain approach that we're looking at. So yes, inputs are good for farmers. Yes, the knowledge is necessary. access to market is good, but also finance becomes a key driver. When you speak to farmers across the continent, one of the first things they would let you hear, and they will say it over and over, is access to finance is the biggest hurdle to productivity. How do we ensure that we're not a financial company, but how do we ensure that we bring in the right people around the table to solve for the challenges that farmers are having on the continent? Perhaps I will stop here, but just to give kind of a broader view of where we are acting, what we are doing, and the types of investments we're bringing on the continent.
No, that's wonderful to hear. And in fact, I want to pick up, Mildred, on something for all of us to discuss in terms of where you left off on to reach the millions of people that you're trying to reach. It really takes the effective use and uptake of digital platforms. And so, the Digital Transformation with Africa initiative, it was launched as part of the U.S. Africa Leaders Summit just in December of 2022. So it's now in its second year, and it's ushered in pledges of, from the latest stats that I have here are 800 million. And it's a mix, almost even, between investments and finance facilitation. In order to accelerate digital transformation in Africa through a few different streams, right? So I guess my question to each of you is, talk a little bit more about why that's important and how it's going, right? From your different perspectives, right? How can we use some of these approaches to attract even more tech usage and tech investment in Africa? And how can African countries really engage and innovate to build up digital platforms because they will actually help to facilitate the sort of trade environment that we want to see? I'll start back with you, Danielle.
Certainly. That is a great question. From Prosper's perspective, we are also involved in the digital transformation with Africa, and we've actually partnered with Cisco on a number of projects. I'll speak to one that I'm familiar with is we identified, or rather a diaspora tech company identified us during the last ALS and noted how they wanted to work on cybersecurity on the continent. And we were able to connect them with Cisco and the government of Cote d'Ivoire, the government of Burkina Faso. And now through that level of engagement, they are bringing Cisco technology to the continent with the support of these African governments to upgrade their cybersecurity infrastructure and their digital infrastructure, actually removing infrastructure that was acquired previously, Huawei infrastructure that was acquired previously. So I think that's an excellent example of how Prosper wants to engage in this space, because it's important for Africans to have access to the best technology, to U.S. technology, and to really have sovereignty over that, which was somewhat lacking in the prior technology that they had. Digital transformation is extremely important in terms of reaching the population. Back to your point, if you're going to reach the populations that you're trying to reach, which can be, somewhat spread out throughout the continent, you really do need to have the data centers, the access to internet, and then finally, access to capital, because what we've also found is that a lot of these problems that the continent is facing, you have youth that have digital solutions for those problems, but they don't have the incubators, they don't have access to the VC capital. So, I don't see Prosper as playing a role of solving problems, but identifying the problem solvers within the private sector and matching them with opportunities to explore developing those solutions, giving them access to VC capital, ensuring that the private sector in the US and globally knows that the keys to solving those problems really are on the continent. but they need to have that opportunity to develop them and scale them.
Thanks. Kristen, you've done a lot of thinking on these issues of digital services in Africa.
Yes. And if I can speak more broadly, I think we've seen a lot of positive signs, on the digital trade front. Most recently, the extension of the WTO e-commerce moratorium, which was a significant victory in the face of very challenging times. But to take that one step further, and by the way, this excellent piece that CSIS wrote on AGOA, has a great discussion here of how important it is. Can I move to AGOA? I wanted to talk a little bit about how, if we're looking at the future of AGOA, it was a very strong case made in this paper that we agree with is, how to build more digital trade components into that agreement. There's so many, I think, important avenues, both for, Africa itself, but also for how it's viewed in the world of engaging in some of these multilateral agreements, not just on the WTO side, but also the WTO, extending the WTO information technology agreement to Africa. It's something that reduces customs duties significantly. And it's not just about, I don't think about just the customs duties, but it's sending the signal to the world that this is a priority for us in terms of, let's get more trade, let's get more digital transformation. I think these are really powerful things that could be done and should be maybe taken to the next level of discussion, because we think that having support from Africa on the WTO e-commerce moratorium was really significant, and it will be even more important as we move towards 2026, which is the next time we have to discuss the extension of the moratorium. But also to be working on some of these other issues as we talk about AGOA renewal, including the information technology agreement, which I think is so important. But if I could just continue on that path for just a second, not only tariffs on products, but I know at least my former colleagues at Commerce and State were working on a lot of data flow issues, efforts to kind of stem the tide against data localization, efforts to ensure that data can flow across borders seamlessly. I mean, these are really important, especially in the age of the great artificial intelligence, which relies, most AI systems are reliant upon the data that they can access. So I think there are efforts. I know my colleagues at Commerce participate in this network for African data protection authorities. There are workshops on data protection, AI, and data flows issues. But I think these are really some areas where there's room for a lot of growth, and that Africa can be seen as a leader. Another initiative that is big at the Commerce Department is this Global Cross-Border Privacy Rules Forum, where we've had significant participation from countries in Africa, and I really hope that continues, because the aim of that system is to ensure that data can flow and that folks don't have to comply with all different kinds of data protection regimes in each country where they do business. So it can also be, I think, a real positive signal to participate in those kinds of dialogues. So, I mean, just to talk about digital transformation, digital trade, and the opportunities ahead. I know, at least in the United States, if anybody's watching me, there's so many interesting things going on this week in D.C., including, the hearings about trade with our USTR Ambassador Tai going up before several committees in Congress to talk about the future of trade in the United States. And it's a tough environment right now. There's lots of things going on. We have elections. It's difficult. But the thing I can say with great certainty, having been in the bureaucracy through many different administrations and elections and transitions of power, is that the good staff people of the Department of Commerce and the Department of State and the United States Trade Representative and others, continue to work on these partnerships, continue to work on these initiatives. Like you were saying, there are lots of partnerships and things we can do without trade agreements until we figure out, how we're going to approach those issues. But these partnerships, the trip that Secretary Raimondo is leading to Kenya next week, those things are so important to continue the momentum and continue having these conversations about how we can deepen our level of engagement and participation and work together in things like the Information Technology Agreement and the WTO, because we can make some pretty significant progress. I think on our own at the staff level, trying to just talk about what the issues are and find ways to move forward.
Mildred, your thought?
Yeah, thank you, Noam. For me, I just want to state something, that Africa's digital transformation is happening as we speak. Looking at the population, when you look at the demographic spread in Africa, we're looking at 42% of Africa's population is below the age of 25. That is massive. Young people who are eager for what is possible. And I think the digital transformation opens those possibilities for them. So Africa is transforming itself, I think, faster in a digital space than it would in an industrial space. How do we harness that speed of adoption and turn it into business opportunities, whether it's for the continent or for the US, from a trade perspective? My thinking is perhaps a question I would like to even hear from the room, what you all think. From a geopolitical perspective, we have other players that are coming into the continent, no doubt. But where I think the US has a huge opportunity is the investment in digital transformation, in Africa's digital transformation. The US has done a lot, don't get me wrong. But the future of Africa's trade space, or any transformation that will take place in Africa, from agriculture to healthcare, anything, would depend on how much we adopt digital tools and skills. And so we see it as an opportunity. So while we're even transforming our business model on the continent, we're not only looking at buyer as an input provider, but also as a digital provider. Mm-hmm. Because we understand that digital skills, digital tools would be what would allow us to scale in terms of reach, whether it's reach looking at it from a market perspective, reach looking at it from a knowledge capacity development perspective, reach looking at it from even a financial transformation perspective. Because if you take Kenya, for example, and a lot of us know maybe about our digital money called M-Pesa, it changed completely how we do business. If I were to walk into a hamlet, I would even use the word a hamlet in Kenya, I would be able to buy a bottle of water, if possible, without any notes or coins in my pocket. And I don't need a bank account. I just need money on my phone. And I don't need a smartphone even for that. That I can actually just hashtag 1234, and I put the amount and I can sell, and we're trading across. And this is spreading across the continent. What is the US doing to really harness those possibilities? From an ag company perspective, we see the opportunities. Because what we're able to do today is to allow farmers across the continent be able to buy inputs, trade without moving, without getting out 10 kilometers sometimes, 10 miles to be able to get to the next store, but they're able to trade. It's micro trading happening across the continent, but it's adding up to much. We need to rethink how we do business and investment in Africa from what is traditional, so even traditional from an agriculture perspective, you look at AGOA, that's why I think there's an opportunity come 2025 to do a reform, to rethink what else are we missing out? Are we limiting the potential of trade between the US and Africa? Are we limiting Africa's capacity also to be able to trade perhaps in bigger volumes when it comes to the US? And I think we really, really need to look at digital tools, digital skills, digital spaces to harness something bigger. Because if the US doesn't take that space, somebody else will. Let's just think about it.
Well, I'm actually going to turn to the audience in just one moment. I'm going to ask one more question, so folks should prepare their questions, because you're putting a challenge also to the audience to think about this. The last question that I have actually relates to something, Mildred, that you said earlier in terms of, I guess it relates to, the percentage of production and essentially the food systems that are reliant on smallholder farmers across the continent. And yet Africa, is experiencing really dramatic population and demographic changes in the form of urbanization.
Yes.
Right? And so there's a rapid urbanization. 80% of population growth that's predicted is predicted to occur in cities.
Yes.
And so I'm interested in how you think about that from where you sit at Bayer, and I'm also interested in how Prosper Africa thinks about that. It has all types of implications for other types of markets that we're not even probably talking about in terms of property and real estate. So I'm interested in what sort of thoughts that provokes. Mildred, I'll start with you and then Danielle.
Yes. So from our perspective, how we see it is the lowest, more than 60% of people working in Africa and working in agriculture. How do we ensure that it's profitable enough to keep these young people working on the farms and getting the right value for their produce? I think there are many things that we've looked at. One of them, of course, is looking at even policy. What are the policies that governments can put in place that would encourage agriculture uptake by young people, for example? Young people don't own land. Land is a very sensitive thing in Africa. For you to be able to walk into a bank or any financial institution as such, whether it's online or not, to say, I think I can grow green beans, can I have $1,000, and you own no land, nothing will happen. And that, in a way, disenfranchises young people. So you see a lot of young people, not necessarily because they don't like agriculture, just because there are so many hurdles that they have to face, that the easier thing is to gravitate towards the urban cities. And of course, we're seeing growing populations, the challenges that comes with, it's not what I'm addressing now, but what we're thinking is, how do we ensure that agriculture becomes attractive enough? On one hand, 80% of our food is grown by smallholder farmers. On the other hand, we have more than 350 million people on the continent who go hungry every day. There's something that is not happening right, whether there are areas where we have excess of. In this case, it will be maybe a supply chain issue to be able to move from where we have excesses to where we don't. There are major needs in downstream investment when it comes to warehousing, cold rooms and things which are lacking, because more than 45% of crops grown in Africa are lost, post-harvest losses. There's a lot that perhaps can be done. There's a lot that needs to be done. But to be honest, how we see it is, if we can make agriculture profitable, if we can make agriculture attractive enough, then perhaps we would reduce that influx into urban cities and we can have more people growing more food more sustainably, of course, increasing productivity yields and hence closing that gap when it comes to food security.
Interesting, thank you. Danielle, do you have thoughts on in sort of rapid urbanization and how that even affects the thinking of a lever and tool like Prosper Africa?
Sure. So, in terms of rapid urbanization, we see that as an opportunity to concentrate resources and support more investment in those spaces. And so from our perspective, we take our cues from the private sector and try to fill in gaps that will de-risk investments, de-risk doing business in those areas. And so with rapid urbanization, what would come along with it is a population looking for an opportunity. And I think back to your digitization question, that's the opportunity to really identify a target population that is receptive, open, and willing to engage in the more digital space. And so we see that as an opportunity to concentrate resources in that space and to attract investment, more investment in that space.
Great. Let me turn to the audience and questions. Do we have a microphone going around? Okay. So I see one question right here, this gentleman here, and then we'll turn there as well.
Thank you. Butch Zackrell, I'm president of LP3 Global. I kind of got two questions. One's for the audience. How many people in the audience actually provide goods and services in Africa today? Okay, good, a couple.
A few hands, yeah.
We're one of them.
Yeah.
We are a brand new business located in Nairobi, Kenya, a spinoff from our U.S. business here. It is a small business. First of all, I'd like to thank CSIS for putting the forum on and producing great alumni who helps us create that narrative. From a small business perspective, boots on the ground, fingers on the keyboards, how do we get this help? And is there anyone really to hold our hands through this process? So we provide cybersecurity training, IT training, Cisco certifications, bridging the skills gap. And when I first started this endeavor, that's what we called it. Working with our smart people here, transform that into cyber workforce development and creating the narrative of the social and economic impact that it makes. We train one person for a good job. It uplifts three others in the goods and services that they can buy. But my question is, who's going to hold my hand?
Mm-hmm. Great. Let's take another question, and then we'll bring that back. And Danielle, especially, I'm going to turn to you on that. But please, sir.
Hi, my name is Dan Silverstein. I'm a private sector advisor in agricultural and economic development. I'm not sure that this is beyond the scope of this discussion, but while I was listening to you talk, I was thinking about foreign currency reserves. Does it enter into your thinking as to the constraint on the countries in which you're trying to develop trade, that they may not be candidates for the international trading markets?
Great, thank you. So let's bring both of those back. Danielle, I'm going to start with you, see if you have thoughts on that, and then if others want to jump in.
So I'll take the first question. Sure. Prosper partners with 17 U.S. government agencies. And so in terms of identifying the correct agency to hold your hand, it sounds like it would be Commerce. We have foreign commercial service officers, a large office, I believe, in Nairobi, but they are there to support U.S. investment on the continent. And so once you've identified specifically what your challenge is, U.S. Foreign Commercial Service is there to hold your hand and accompany you through that process. The other
Dan had a
gentleman?
question about holdings of foreign currency reserves. Yeah.
Yes, so that is on our radar. We know that it's a challenge. There are a lot of, again, the trade is really about risk allocation, right? And so for it to happen efficiently, again, our thinking is what are the risks, who should be allocated what risk, and how can we de-risk? So with respect to foreign currency reserves, it is a challenge. We recognize that. We are really at the beginning of thinking about how to intervene in a way that lowers that barrier to trade. So I don't have a full answer for you right now, but it is definitely on our radar. And if you have any suggestions, we're absolutely open to hearing. Okay. All right, you'll see me afterwards then.
Kristen, do you want to jump in?
Sure. Just to piggyback on your point, well, thank you for being on the ground in Africa and doing the training that you do. I was just going to say the same thing. Being at Commerce, the Foreign Commercial Service is certainly a great resource, and I can certainly provide you. We actually, I think, have a digital economy attaché in that country, so I think we can try to make a connection there. But also the State Department and their economic counselors are also great resources. And I'd have to look and see if there are other U.S. trade agencies like the Small Business Administration, Exim Bank. A lot of them have officers in country. But I can certainly kind of put you in touch with that network if it's helpful. And maybe you already have those contacts. But
Some, but not all.
yeah, it can never hurt to keep the lines of communication open. And then on the foreign currency reserves, Cisco, from my understanding, from what I've seen so far, we look at a number of indicators, having to do with the whole environment in the country, including, what they're doing on skilling, what they're doing on sustainability, what they're doing on investments in infrastructure, how they're participating in the world in terms of their approach to international trade. There's a whole lot of factors we consider. So we can kind of assess, what the whole project's likelihood of success is. But I can tell you, I've never heard that specifically called out in our list of factors, but I'm sure it is on the radar.
Let me turn back to the audience and take some other thoughts, other questions. Back here, there's one, and yeah, let's take that one.
Hi, thanks. My name is Jake Grover. I'm a senior advisor with the Millennium Challenge Corporation. So I wanted to follow up on some of the AGOA points and reauthorization. And a recent proposal that's been floating around from the Center for Global Development. Justin Sandover and Arvind Subramanian just came out with a nice new working paper. And it shows a couple of things. First, it rigorously shows that AGOA had an impact, particularly relative to the counterfactual, especially in industries where there was a tariff advantage, such as textiles. But second, it suggests we could be doing more. They basically say, look, there's nothing special about zero tariffs, and so why don't we think about negative tariffs? Negative tariff being a subsidy, of course, in the form of a tax rebate to importers. So this strikes me as brilliant, right? It's expanding something that we know that works already. It's market driven, it's pretty simple to administer, it's low cost, no appropriation, just foregone revenues. And it could potentially double or triple textiles in Africa. So I'm curious if you all are familiar with this proposal, if you're considering it, or as we're looking ahead to AGOA reauthorization, are there other creative options on the table like that?
Thank you. Thanks for that question. And I think that it dovetails with sort of some studies that have been looking at the utilization of AGOA and the variation of utilization across different sectors and in different countries, and how to actually really get even more out of it. Danielle, again, I'm going to turn to you because given your position with Prosper Africa, I'm sure you do a lot of thinking about these issues. I don't know if you're familiar with that specific proposal, but interested in your thoughts.
Yes, when that was circulated widely in our circle, so absolutely familiar with it. Just to level set, USTR is really in charge of that policy for the US government. So what we do at Prosper is we try to gauge what the private sector would recommend for AGOA and advocate with respect to that, knowing that USTR is really the lead on that. Being familiar with that article, we think it's an innovative approach. We've seen it work, with the IRA. And so we know that there is there, but, and if that were the direction that it ultimately, the renewal went in, we think that would be that would have a positive impact on AGOA utilization and really show U.S. government commitment to supporting increased AGOA utilization in a real way?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as Jake noted, it is in effect a subsidy, and subsidies get very political very quickly. But it has the potential to really sort of elevate exactly the type of goals the long-term goals that we're talking about here. Are there other thoughts, actually, in response to that question before we take another from the crowd?
Just, I think it's great to have these creative ideas about AGOA. And I also just am making a pitch, as you said, USTR, along with, I think, Commerce and State, thinking about AGOA strategy, need to hear from companies about its importance and its, about concrete ideas to make it even more impactful than it already is. Because I do think, it's just like I was mentioning earlier, it's a difficult moment in the United States right now. I think there's a lot of assessment and evaluation about our approach, and that's all great. But I think we're going to have to really engage deeply on AGOA renewal as we go forward. Yeah.
No, if I could just add something for me, perhaps, is to look at how to incentivize sustainably grown food. For example, maybe this is something I think in the next conversations that AGOA can definitely look at, and the US can set some of those clear standards for whether we're looking at it at duty-free access or even a negative impact or access, but really how do you offer, some of those technical assistance that would help African growers especially meet certain standards. I think that would also be a win-win, especially as we look at the impact on the environment and things like that, and this green energy transition that we're talking about, that there is an opportunity, especially in agriculture, that we can help Africa transition in a very responsible and clean way, and AGOA can be that instrument that incentivizes that change.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in an opportunity to refresh AGOA, if that's the path that legislators take, because it's certainly an easier path to just sort of rubber stamp what was, but it doesn't necessarily fit with the economy of today and tomorrow. I mean, if you think about the conversation we were having around, digital economy earlier, to your point, Mildred, the nexus of essentially, climate change and transition or climate smart agriculture and food security challenges. Or there are other conversations, and my colleagues here at CSIS have been talking about sort of critical minerals and how the sort of demand for more diversified production and processing and mining of critical minerals and where that fits into these tools. Let me turn back for more questions from the audience, other thoughts that people have that have been prompted by today's discussion. We've got this gentleman up here, up front, and then one in the back. So we'll take both of those together. We'll start with this gentleman right up front in the front row, and then we'll go to the back row.
I'm Bob Hershey. I'm a consultant. What is being done to facilitate holding meetings online and getting the funding together for projects?
What's being done to facilitate holding meetings online as opposed to in person, you're saying, to do more project facilitation? Okay, and let's turn to the back for a question there.
Thanks. I'm Torsten Janos. I'm an economics professor at the University of Wyoming. The panel discussed the importance of credit and digitization. I was wondering, can international digital credit kind of make a difference? Because traditionally, businesses borrow from domestic markets, but governments, both governments and business and banks have a hard time accessing international credit. But can digital international credit kind of make a difference? Like, for example, lending directly to farmers.
Sorry, say that.
Yes, for example, international lending directly to even to farmers or to businesses.
Got it. Thank you. So really, how does sort of digital sort of breakdown of intermediaries with regard to international lending and credit really impact the ability to get to where we want to go? And then the first question about basically, digital facilitation of meetings and how that's actually sort of affecting the path towards greater sort of trade facilitation, greater investment, two-way. So who wants to jump in on either of those?
We've got a lot of equipment we want to sell,
Go ahead, Kristen.
No, just, I've certainly seen, my experience has been both at Commerce, we have definitely adopted to the post-pandemic world where we're always trying to accommodate both online and in-person interactions. I mean, we've certainly make a lot of products that try to, make this easier for people through WebEx and video conferencing. We certainly have these discussions about those types of sales. And I do think, on both sides, just for cost reasons and convenience, it's always better to get more engagement, and we've certainly seen that. I don't know specifically about steps we've taken to increase that, but I'm certainly happy to talk with you some more about things we might be able to do, but we're all in favor of trying to be more inclusive and connect more people to interactions.
And so either more on that front or on the other front about sort of international direct lending and how that's sort of affecting things.
Sure. So in terms of the digital meetings, a part of our portfolio, I know I've spoken on, specific export transactions, but we also do what we call enabling environment work. And what that entails is, having these webinars, organizing targeted groups to explain either how to use AFCFTA in their work, how to export under AGOA. So we obviously use that to scale our reach, to be able to have this, to get this information to small businesses on how to use these tools in their businesses. So yes, we do have digital meetings and webinars, and we use that as a way to engage groups throughout the continent to support exports to the U.S. and intra-Africa trade. With respect to access to capital for farmers or even small businesses, that is a huge question and a huge challenge. And it can be addressed on a number of levels. At the micro level, when we've spoken to a number of African banks who have capital to deploy, but see that group as too high risk to engage, and whether it's a collateral requirement, whether it's the fact that where's the credit score, where's the digital identity, where's the digital footprint for me to really analyze whether this business is credit worthy, that's a huge gap. But we know that there are African fintechs and emerging companies who know that that's a challenge and who have developed platforms that actually make small businesses and micro businesses bankable, bank ready. They're taking that information, they are digitizing these companies using technology like M-Pesa to track the amount of revenue that these companies have and packaging it in a way that a local lender can say, okay, I know who you are, I see you've had X amount of sales. Now I can actually, use our methodology to figure out what type of credit or access to credit would be appropriate for your growth potential. And so, but that's a lot of work, so we have to be able to scale that. We have to be able to have the technologies to start digitizing IDs, transactions, credit histories, so that that can then open up access to capital, not only at the micro level, but small and medium-sized businesses. So that's definitely on our radar. From an aggregation perspective, I'd mentioned this Africa Trade Desk. So because we're working with an intermediary that's aggregating, we have found that financial institutions want to give credit to the intermediator, right? So they're saying, we'll take a risk on you, you deal with the small businesses and the smallholder farmers that you're sourcing from. And then, of course, because they're partnering with the U.S. government, that's another way that we've de-risked opening up access to credit and to capital for small businesses and smallholder farmers.
And I'm interested, actually, back to the questioner. You said you're at the University of Wyoming, is that what you said? And are you doing research in this area?
I mostly do like governance issues in developing countries, like democracy and conflict. I haven't worked a lot with credit or finance as well. I mean, I do a little bit of stuff with international macro level finance, like capital flows and exchange rates, but not so much at the micro level.
Yeah. But I think as these sectors are emerging and being disintermediated, it creates a lot of interesting dynamics for, in often cases, innovative ways to sort of package and get financing to those who have the legitimate capability to really effectively and responsibly use that financing. It's just you have to find ways to sort of identify that and flag that. Let me just scan to see if there are any other questions. Oh, there's one more over here, please.
Hi, thank you. My name is Augusta Reinhardt. I'm a research associate with Dexis Consulting Group. And I just have a quick question. What role, if any, do you envision government funding adopting in the digital transformation of the continent?
So government funding and the role that it plays in digital transformation? Oh, well, I think that there's
You mean U.S. government funding or African government funding?
U.S. government funding.
Certainly. So, again, we are right in the middle of it. We partner, we work with Digital Transformation for Africa. We are always looking for partners to then do that type of matchmaking. There is absolutely a role. I know we are deploying resources to support that, and the Department of Commerce as well. So there is a role for government funding. There isn't a lot of government funding available, but there's definitely a role for that. And again, we're looking at that enabling environment and what can we do to de-risk investment in that space? What can we do to match companies because we're on the ground and we rely on our U.S. government counterparts, State Department, Commerce, MCC, when they identify and have partners that we think we can match with the partners in DTA, we want to ensure that we're all on the same page, that there's an open flow of information so the folks on the ground on the continent can collaborate with folks in Washington and we can create partnerships that can have that type of impact that we're seeking.
Great. Thank you. And I do imagine that, the thing is digital transformation, it's happening. It's happening. It's a dynamic space and it's happening. The role that the government often plays is to what you've been saying, is in identifying where can government sort of tweak the playing board so that it happens slightly differently, so funds flow faster in a certain direction or get to people who otherwise wouldn't otherwise access the ability to leverage digital transformation. We've had many panels and discussions at CSIS over recent years on digital transformation, and more the country representatives that we are engaging with now come from official ministries of digital transformation. I mean, so this is a space where not just the U.S. government, but other governments are really organizing themselves to really take advantage of sort of the new digital commerce world. Please join me in thanking our panelists today. It was a wonderful discussion. We deeply appreciate it. And we're going to have a bit of a break now. Folks can mill about, and then we're going to have the next keynote at what time? 1:15. At 1:15 is the next keynote back in this room. So thank you very much.